This morning I want to share with you what came to me in prayer, in adoration this morning, in an attempt to paint a picture of St. Matthew in some broad brushstrokes. So St. Matthew was a tax collector. So every single day he concerned himself with numbers, amounts, calculations, where he would have been surrounded by cost and concrete sums. Everything would have been formulaic, static, and by the book. Except, of course, when he, as a tax collector, would attempt to get extra from somebody from his own pocket, then it wouldn't be by the book. But I'm guessing, too, that this would cause some degree of anxiety, right? Whenever we're doing something wrong and we're cheating someone of something, we're trying to get away, manipulating something, I'm sure we kind of internally can feel there's something off about this, right? So it would have caused some degree of anxiety in him, trying to work hard, put an effort in to figure who to swindle and who to steal from. In other words, his entire life would have been a calculation and filled with stress about how to provide for himself, right? This constant focus upon himself. Then Jesus arrives at his post, and Jesus wanted something different for him. Because Jesus wants something different than this for all of us. Jesus always wants more for us. He wanted to give Matthew more, and to do so lovingly and freely, without Matthew having to calculate and focus upon himself and how to provide for himself at the expense of others. And the same exact thing is true for us. Jesus wants to give to us in such an abundance. He wants to give so we don't have to think about in our lives how we can take. Jesus wanted Matthew and wants for us in turn to love. And he wants for us specifically to live the truth of something that St. Therese expressed when she said, when one loves, one does not calculate. It's so beautiful and it is so profound. So I want to repeat that again. St. Therese of Lisieux says, when one loves, one does not calculate. Matthew's entire life was all calculation. And I will say that every calculation is limited. Love does not calculate. Jesus stepped into Matthew's customs booth. But more importantly, we could say that Jesus stepped into Matthew's world, into Matthew's reality, into Matthew's experience of life. And Jesus actively loved Matthew in that encounter, in that precise event, in that moment in Matthew's existence. Jesus loved him. Because when one truly loves, one does not calculate. And for once in his life, Matthew experienced more. He finally experienced more than a limited calculation, which I'll say perhaps he would have thought to himself that that's all that there was. He experienced more than a limited calculation. He encountered infinite love. He encountered the life and the love of God himself. Now imagine just for a moment the peace and the freedom that he would have felt in that moment. Imagine the hope that he would have felt. Matthew in that moment was moved. Literally, he was invited to step forward, to step out from the calculated life that, while comfortable and predictable, did not bring him any joy. And he perceived in that moment of love that there was more. And his heart was moved because it was made for union with the infinite love of the heart of God. He was changed and he never looked back. All because Jesus stepped into his world. Jesus broke through and stepped into his bubble and invited him to follow him, to stop calculating, to step out of his limited world and to step into the love of God, to live in the world of God, which is the truth of reality. Sometimes the world that we live and we put ourselves in, it's not reality. We think it's our reality, but it's not. God wants us to live reality, which is his reality, to live in his world that he's created. He wants more in our lives than we limit ourselves to. Okay, so that covers Matthew. What about you? I promise you that in this very moment, Jesus is stepping into your world, into your experience of life, and he's inviting you to more by inviting you to quit calculating and instead to love and to trust. Now, let me say there was way more to Matthew's encounter with Jesus than Jesus simply speaking words. I'm sure that there were other people that were present with Matthew that day that could have asked Matthew to follow them, and that his heart would have remained unmoved, that he wouldn't have taken a single step forward. So what was it that made Matthew decide to step forward and to trust love? What was it that made Matthew stop calculating? It absolutely, certainly must have been the gaze of Christ as he looked upon Matthew with love. Now, all of us have heard this gospel. We've probably heard it dozens of times. We've heard the words. But have you seen the loving gaze of Jesus as he invites you to follow him? If not, we're going to change that right now. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And I want you to set yourself in this scene, to picture yourself in the precise place that you tend to frequent, where you think you calculate the most. The place where you feel stuck and most trapped. Maybe a place that it seems like there's no way out of. And there's a knock at the door. And I want you to go and to open it. To open it and to see who's there at the door. Look into his face. What's his expression? And I want to ask you right now to take note of how you feel. And now intentionally look into his eyes. He hasn't spoken a single word yet, but I want to ask you, what does his gaze say to you? What does his gaze speak to you? Let him hold you in this gaze, even if it's perhaps uncomfortable or if it's perhaps overwhelming. Do not turn away. Lock eyes with him and let him love you. And now he tenderly and lovingly says, "Follow me." You've been invited by infinite love to follow him and to remain in communion with him, with his heart and with this gaze. And I will tell you honestly that in this moment, right here, right now, you could calculate. You could try to figure it all out, to figure out what it means for your life, to weigh your options. But calculating, doing so, the only thing that it could do would be to limit and to take away the love that you have found. So let go. Dive into his presence. Calculate no more. Receive his love and follow him.